Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, February 21st, 2000, and it's my pleasure to be with William Lindamood, a 1949 graduate of the University of Arizona College of Law. I'm Vicki Fleischer, and on behalf of the law school, I'll be asking you some questions, Mr. Lindamood. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for asking me, Vicki.
Mr. Lindamood, can you tell us why you decided to go to law school in the first place?
I actually decided, it's difficult to believe, to go to law school when I was a sophomore in high school. I had an uncle who had been a lawyer in Tennessee, and I decided I wanted to be one, and that never varied, and I continued all the way through high school and college.
Great. And why did you pick the University of Arizona?
It so happened that I lived in Tucson. I had come out from Mississippi, and it was natural for my father being ill for me to stay and help take care of him. So I went to both the undergraduate school and the law school here at the University of Arizona.
How difficult was it to get into law school at that time?
It wasn't difficult at that time. I think, don't even know whether grades were considered. I had a Phi Beta Kappa key. I don't think I'd had much trouble getting in from that standpoint, but we really did not have, as I recall, but terrible interest. This was wartime in law school, and it was not difficult to get in, as I recall. We did not have many students.
How difficult was it to stay in?
Are you talking about from the standpoint of how difficult the classes were, or just?
Well, how many of your classmates graduated with you, that started with you?
I would say 90% of them. I really believe that. It would be difficult to remember 50 years ago, but I think it was that much.
Mm-hmm. Great. And how many students were in your class? You said there weren't too many.
There weren't too many. I think that, as I've observed in recent years, I know now we have 22 or 23 left from that class, but I think we must have had about 35 in that senior class, as I recall.
Okay. And were most of your classmates from Arizona?
Yes, they were.
Mm-hmm.
However, New Mexico did not have a law school at that time, and we did have some students from New Mexico, and there were always a few from other states. I think there were several from California, but definitely they were mostly from Arizona.
Okay. What was the average age of students in your class?
Well, since the war was over and the GI Bill was helping a little bit, I even went to school with 2 or 3 boys who already had mechanical engineering degrees, decided they wanted to go to the war. I would imagine, I would have to say mid-20s.
Mm-hmm. And were there any women or minority students?
Positively and unequivocally, except what is so amazing is that during my entire 3 years, not just 1 year, but during the entire 3 years, one lady started with me, one came the second year, one came the third year. During the 3 years that I was at law school, only 3 ladies attended.
Oh, so some things have changed.
Yes, they have changed.
Was there summer school when you attended law school?
As I recall, yes, there definitely was summer school, because I got married after my second year, and first semester of my second year, and I wanted to get through in a hurry, so I finished my last 3 semesters in 1 year. We definitely have summer school, yes.
Mm. Were there any clinical programs?
Any what kind?
Clinical?
By that, what do you mean, Vicki?
Where you, as a student, would represent a client under the supervision of a law professor and take that case to court and represent the client.
We had moot court,
Mm-hmm.
but I was not, I can't remember whether there was another such course or not. I do remember moot court. I was involved in that, but if there were another of that type courses,
Mm-hmm.
I did not take it.
Okay. What type of student activities were there?
We had 2 legal fraternities, Phi Delta Phi. Can't remember that. During my second year of the 3 years, I was president of Phi Delta Phi, and then ours was the largest one. There was another smaller one. There were those activities, but I hate to tell you, that's too long ago to remember what else we did.
What type of interaction did the students have with the faculty?
I think it was good. I don't know that I can remember any formal interaction planned or anything, but it seems like to me that we did have picnics or things like that where we had a chance to visit and meet our professors and get to know them well. You must remember the school wasn't too big at that time, and we did not have a tremendous number of professors. And I found them always accessible, almost, very much so.
Good. Where did most of your classmates live?
Undoubtedly, I can think of 8 to 10 of that class who are very close friends of mine who are in Tucson. I think there's one other, perhaps still practicing, but definitely most of the group came from Arizona, and most of them, even though ASU, as I recall, did not have the law school at that time, most of my class was definitely Tucson citizens.
Mm-hmm. And during law school, did they live near the law school when they were students?
Quite a few of them I know lived with their parents in Tucson. I can think of at least a half a dozen of them. I would say most of them lived with their parents. I can remember a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Were there any married students?
A few, can't remember who they were, but there were some that were married, but not many.
Okay.
Not many.
What were the job prospects like when you graduated?
It would be difficult for me to recall. I think there were job prospects available with the larger law firms in town. But it so happened that I married a lady whose father was the federal collector of internal revenue for the state of New Mexico, so I began by clerking for the Chief Justice of the United States 10th Court of Appeals in Albuquerque. But I think I could probably have found a job. I think there were opportunities available, yes, definitely. I think the firms probably went out of their way to hire the graduates. And I think the big firm was coming into play. You know, back in those days, the firms were 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that, and I think they were getting bigger, so I think there were places for the students as they graduated, as I recall.
So you went and started your law career in Albuquerque.
Yes.
How did you come back to Tucson?
I've been tossed out of a lot of places. In Albuquerque, after clerking for the judge, I then practiced law with a former governor who was also a friend of my father-in-law and his nephew. And since then, after that, Vicki, you could not specialize in those days, and I did not like trial work. I was supposed to have been good at it, but I did not like it, and I chose to leave for a specialty, and for 9 years I was a title insurance executive, first in Albuquerque, then in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I became a member of my 3rd Bar Association, back in Phoenix, where I became president of the State Title Association during my 3 years, and then I returned to Tucson in 1963 to practice law with 2 friends.
Who were?
So, Honorable Robert O. Lesher, who was my tennis partner, his father, Zip Lesher, was our registrar here, and the school's representative to the Board of Conference, and Bob and I had played doubles together. He was appointed to the Supreme Court to replace someone. I can't remember whether he decided to run again or not, but while he was there, he would visit with my wife and said, let's start a law firm. So a year later, I came back. And the other was the Honorable William Kimball, who had been a judge out of Mott Gentry's firm down in Bisbee. So Lesher, Kimball, and Lindamood started in 1963.
Great. Okay, let's take you back to law school.
Right.
It's 1949 and you just graduated and you have to take the bar exam.
Yes, ma'am.
What was that like?
It wasn't much fun. It lasted 2 days. And I think that the one thing, Vicki, that I remember most of all, I did not find out whether I had passed the bar exam until I graduated in February and took the bar in February, and I don't think I found out until May or June whether I had passed. Meanwhile, I went up with my wife to Albuquerque. There was no reciprocity because New Mexico didn't have a law school. I studied for 4 weeks, took the bar exam there for 2 days, Friday and Saturday, And on Sunday morning, I walked in and found that I had passed. So
they had their acts
you
together.
waited quite a while here to get your grade.
Sounds like it. Mr. Lindamood, do you remember who some of your classmates were, and do you know what they did after law school?
Well, we were talking about Raul Castro, my friend Robert O. Lesher, Jack Donahue, who is an attorney here in town. I wish I had studied the book because we had a very good class, and I'm just trying to remember some of the others. Most of the ones that I knew real well were friends of mine, all stayed here in town.
Mm-hmm.
And we did have a very good class. That just bothers me that I can't remember more of them.
Did you have Hazel Dennison in there?
Hazel, last name?
I think is it Dennison?
There was, wait a minute. Lurleen Gray went to school with me. Lurleen Gray started she was one of the three. Virginia Cash, whose father was a criminal attorney in Phoenix. I definitely remember they went. And yes, I think there was someone named Hazel, but I don't know that I remember her last name.
Mm-hmm.
But during that entire 3 years, there were only the three girls.
I have a couple questions about your classes in law school.
Yes.
What subjects were taught when you were in law school?
What subjects were what?
Were taught.
Oh, I think evidence. Well, of course, we had to take evidence. All of us did that. I think contracts were very popular. I took both personal property and real property. I'm trying to recall, I was not that much interested in trial. I think we had of course we had the moot court, but I think we had a class in trials or whatever we want to call it. I did not take that, but it was pretty much run-of-the-mill, as I say, the property classes, the evidence, the contracts, corporate. I did take corporate law. I think all of those were more common ones, as I recall.
Mm-hmm. How many classes did you take each semester, do you recall?
If I'm not mistaken, I think I took a minimum of 4. I believe we normally had 4. And I think the 4 normally, some up with 2 unit courses, some 3, some 4. But I think that basically, on the average, I took 4 courses during the semester. I might have had 1 at 3 or maybe 1 at 5, but normally 4 courses.
Okay. What were the reading assignments like when you were in law school?
Vicki, what do you mean by reading assignments?
Your homework. Was there a lot of reading?
Yes, there was a lot of reading. I think we were basically, excuse me, as I recall, assigned a number of cases for the next class and so forth. Yes, there was reading, but I cannot remember at this point what type of outside reading we did. But our assignments, we would normally be assigned a given number of cases, which would be brought up during the next session.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to write any papers for your courses?
Yes, I did. I think I had to write I'm trying to remember whether I had to write a paper at the end of the semester. It seems that I did in 2 or 3 courses, but it's too long. I cannot remember which courses they would be. But there were some, yes, some lengthy courses, writings at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall whether your examinations were oral or written examinations?
They were definitely written. I do not remember at any time in the 3 years ever having an oral examination.
And how long was the average examination?
They, as I recall, would give you might not take the time, but as I recall, we were given a minimum of 3, but I think we could stay as long as 4 hours if we wanted to. I think that's what it was.
Mm-hmm. What type of teaching methods were used? We hear a lot about the Socratic method in law school. Was
About
that
what?
the Socratic method?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to tell me. I assume Socratic comes from Socrates. What do we mean by that, Socratic?
We mean that the professor would call Mr. Lindamood, and Mr. Lindamood would stand up and would be grilled with several questions about the case that was being discussed that day.
No question. That is the basic way law school was taught in those days. We would be assigned 4 or 5 or 6 cases during the 50-minute classes. And then the professor would lecture relatively little. We would spend our time discussing that, and he would call on different people throughout the room, and he would ask you, a lot of times he would simply ask you to review the entire case, the factual situation and what it was all about, and then he would ask some questions at the end. And it was not at all uncommon that after grilling me, shall we say, he would ask 2 or 3 other, excuse me again, 2 or 3 other students about the same case. But it was definitely taught in that fashion in those days. Mm-hmm. There was, some classes you would have lecturing on given days, but basically, if that's what we mean by Socratic, it was taught in that manner.
Mm-hmm. I know that you and I have spoken about some of the off-campus social activities that existed in Tucson. Could you tell us about that?
Now, I know you and I have done a lot of talking about a lot of things, but when we're talking about off-campus, you mean my personal involvement, or just talking about law school, or what?
Well, I remember you telling me about the Blue Moon, where some students might spend some R&R time, and I think it would be interesting to hear what students did outside the classroom.
Well, I remember at the time that I first came to Tucson, during my senior year in high school in 1938, and I entered the university in 1939. The Blue Moon wasn't quite in there with one other place. If you go up to Camel and Speedway, and you then go down to, what's the next boulevard? Tucson Boulevard.
Uh-huh.
The pavement ended there. And on the left-hand side was a beautiful little drive-in, to me the most popular one in town, known as El Patio. But directly across was the famous, not infamous, Double R. It was the drinking place of all students. It was the beer spot. And interestingly enough, it was owned and run by a lady who has 2 sons who are very, very well-known lawyers. Ralph Lester and, what's his brother, the younger brother. Ralph Lester was another. I went to school with Ralph. Ralph was also on the tennis team with me. And the younger brother, but that was the great hangout, I mean that. The Blue Moon was wonderful. Yes, it was. Many dances were held there and so forth. You're going back an awful long way, Vicki.
Well, you're doing a really good job of remembering,
but,
so.
I don't know, but I would say that was probably, as a dance spot, excuse me, I would say the Blue Moon was the most common one, where kids could go on weekends informally and so forth. There were an awful lot of formal dances done at the beautiful old El Conquistador Hotel, which today is still my favorite of all. Arizona Inn would be used for a few items and so forth, but I would guess that when the girls and boys, sorority, fraternity, or otherwise, got together, if they did it in public, I would say the Double R as the drinking spot or the beer spot, and the Blue Moon were the 2 most popular in Tucson.
Well, thank you for telling us about that. I have some questions about the faculty when you were in law school. Can you remember how many faculty there were at the time?
Vicki, I would say 8 to 10, but I could be off on that. But I would say it would be in the neighborhood of 8 to 10.
Mm-hmm, that sounds right.
Yeah.
And did you get to interact with your professors outside the classroom?
I did. As you probably know, Dr. Chester Smith, who taught the property classes, Chet, as we didn't call him that, but Chet as he was known, or Chester, also taught the bar review classes. And he taught the bar review classes at his home. And he had a ping pong table out there that we were permitted to play ping pong, since I was the state tennis champion, but I also was a pretty good ping pong player. We had lots of fun doing that, but we would take all of our classes there, and we would have breaks between classes and so forth. But as I recall, it was not difficult to interact with any of our professors, and I mean that sincerely. They were a wonderful group.
Do you know how one became a law professor at that time?
I honestly do not. We had several law professors who were deans. Dean Lyons taught me contracts and then became dean. Byron McCormick taught me a course and then became dean. But I don't know how, whether they, I literally don't remember that. And I couldn't tell you how they were brought onto campus.
A lot of students, even now, don't know that. I think it's
Yeah,
sort of outside the scope.
I know.
Tell me about some of your professors. Who were your favorites?
Well, I was very fond of Chester Smith. I'm going to have to, you know, it gets a little bit difficult to remember back that much. I'm trying to remember now who taught me evidence. I was very fond of Chester Smith and got to know him quite well. I knew Dean Lyons quite well. Very fond of him. I was fond of Byron McCormick. Trying to remember who taught me criminal law. And our present, who am I trying to, Chuck?
Theirs.
Trying to remember whether Chuck came on the faculty that early. He may not have, because I left in '49. I guess as I told you, I was active with the University Alumni Association, but not so much over here. But I knew a lot of the professors and would see them. But you're right, Ayers was not here at that time.
He was a student right after you were.
I think he was too. I think he was too.
Tell me about the Douglas Building, where you had your classes.
Again, it is difficult. It was large enough to take care of all of us. I liked it, as you know. It was right on the main drag, shall we say, right next to the old Centennial Hall. And I think it was beautifully located. I think I loved the location as much as anything else. Common thing was between classes, nobody stayed inside. Everybody came out and they were standing around or sitting around talking outside on the stoops and on the brick walls and this, that, and the other. But it's a little bit difficult to remember the inside of the building and so forth, but I think it was entirely satisfactory, and it was definitely large enough and so on and so forth. I can't even remember when they stopped using it. The only time that I can remember that you would see the big room filled, I remember in the early days of our new probate code, I was one of 3 or 4 of the local attorneys that would come up and teach students to go through this. And we used to have a session each time where a speaker would speak to the entire room. That was our one big room there. It was never filled just on classes. We didn't have that big a student body population. But I liked the building. It was big enough. I think everybody liked it. They really did. And it was beautifully located.
Yeah, it definitely is. What was going on in the world when you were in law school?
(1946 to 1949). Got back from the war, interestingly enough. One thing might interest you. I got back from the war in December of '45 after about 3 years overseas. And I wanted to go immediately. They would not let us. They would not let us enter law school in mid-semester. It was in the fall only, and so I started in the fall of '46. In fact, that was a very interesting, since Dr. Lesher had been it was the registrar, and he had been my tennis coach. He employed me as an assistant registrar that summer, and I entered all of the law school class in the summer of 1946. But sorry, my friend, it's just a little bit too old for, remember what, I'm trying to remember what was going on campus.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's difficult. Obviously, there was a lot of building going on. When I came back after the war, the school had not been built up too much, but by the time I finished law school, Dr. Harville, who was a client of mine, had become president of the university. Dr. Harville was a client of mine later on, and I think the school was by the time I left in '49, I think the school was up in the 25,000 range. At one time it got well over 30,000, and I think that Dr. Harville and the Board of Regents happily decided to cut the strings because we then went into the junior college system. That's the reason we have junior colleges all over. Otherwise, we'd have been like a Big Ten school with 50 or 60,000 students. And I think everybody's been delighted by that. Mm-hmm. I think we now, today, I don't know, don't we still have something like 30, 32, 3, 4, 5 students, 1,000 students? Mm-hmm. I think so.
Yeah. And the law school's 150 per class.
Yeah,
It's
I
pretty
know
small
we talked
still.
about that, 150.
Yeah. Were a lot of your classmates people who had served in the war and then gone to school afterwards?
Yes. I would guess. In those days, when I left for the service in '43, they permitted you to have only, this is the only time that I can remember, you could have only 2 years undergraduate and 3 years of law school. You could have 3 years undergraduate and 3 years of law school, and they then gave you both degrees. Or you could have the full 4 years, your degree, plus the law school. Mm-hmm. That's the way they were doing it there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have some tough questions, but they don't require your memory. If you were to change one thing about legal education from when you went to school to now, what would it be?
That is a tough. I'm sure that most of the other people have said the same thing.
They have.
What would I change? What would I change? Vicki, I don't really know any particular one thing I could think of. Mm-hmm. I must say that I think that the one thing that pleases me most, and since you ladies more or less taking over the world anyway, I think it is wonderful that in the same way that we have, I'm serious about this, in the same way that we have, you tell me, more freshman medical students than we have men, and more freshman law students than we have men. Because in the old days, most of the gals were just, they would do the research work in a firm, or they would handle domestic relations. And I love the idea that they have been given the complete freedom which they have earned and so forth. And I'm sure, as I said, there are just as many good ladies, lawyers out there as there are good men lawyers. It's difficult, though, to decide what I really want to change and so forth. I thought law school was taught the way I had always envisioned it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a combination of lecture and Socratic, as you said, and I think it should be that way. Maybe they could teach a little bit more of the trial work, as we were saying. I don't recall, you would be indicating that there was a trial session. I honestly cannot remember at that time, but I do think that trial work is extremely important, and perhaps that should be sure that there be various courses on that.
Mm-hmm. If you were going to convey a message to a student that was going to law school now, what would it be?
That this is, whether you practice law or not, this is still, in my opinion, this was quite common back in the old days, Many people went to law school as a basic education, intending to do something else. Most people don't do that today. Law school is either more difficult, or I don't find people anymore taking law school just to have 3 years of fun or games, shall we say, and studying hard, etc. But I think that it still is the best basic background for anything, and to go into the field with the idea that you're going to work hard. I think there are opportunities out there, I definitely do. I can't make up my mind whether I would prefer, if I were just starting now, to practice in a small firm or a large firm. I would prefer, I think, to be in a relatively small firm, because when you get to 30, 40, or 50 people, which is even common in Tucson now, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah.
But I think that more than anything else, with that Phi Beta Kappa key, I could probably have gotten degrees scholarships to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, any one of the big boys, but they write the books, and it makes any difference. I think you get out of law school what you put into law school, and if you are going to practice in Arizona, I think the University of Arizona is an excellent school, and we should go here and not worry about trying to go someplace else.
Great.
I really mean that.
Did you feel that you were well prepared to practice law when you graduated?
Yes, I do. You know, this is something that we, in the medical world today and all kind of worlds, we hear criticisms of school structures and what we're, particularly in high school, and what we're getting out with. And I can't speak as an expert on other times and so forth, but I thought when I got out of law school, I was prepared to practice law.
Good.
I really do.
My final question for today. What would you like to see this law school accomplish in the future?
I don't care whether it continues to grow. Probably the law school does. I don't care whether it grows or not. I want it to maintain its excellence and staff. I think we're most lucky to have, obviously, the donations that we have had and so forth. I'm trying to decide what I'd like to see law school do. I don't know that it should be more activist than it is. I think that we're getting to a place in education, and our president, Dr. Likens, is really bringing this forth more than any of the presidents. I have known now approximately 8 presidents. Known 4 or 5 of them real well, and I think he has brought to the foreground that it's up to us and the population to get in and support, and even support financially, if we want to continue the excellence, etc. And as I say, I don't know whether that means that we should be more activists in getting out there and trying to raise money and so forth. But more than any single thing, I'd like for it to keep on being as good as it is, okay? That's
Okay.
That's the best I can do for you.
Okay.